My life, before the storm, felt like a department store perfume counter, shimmering, artificial, but with the constant promise of something beautiful. I was Carly, sales manager, good at selling fantasies in glass bottles. Little did I know the real nightmare lurking just around the corner. It started cliché, a man needing help. Michael, tall, with that shy guy nervous fidgeting that I, with all my practiced charm, found immediately disarming. He was searching for the perfect perfume for his mother. A good son. A good start. Don't worry, I'd said, all practiced reassurance. We'll find something perfect. We sampled, chatted. He worked for his family's construction company. Lived nearby. Seemed genuine. His brown eyes held a warmth that cut through the manufactured air of the store. I learned that it was a family business that was established for a number of years. An hour later, floral and elegant, the bottle was wrapped. Michael hesitated, that nervous energy bubbling to the surface again. Carly, would you maybe want to grab coffee sometime? My heart hammered. I had to force my voice to stay even. I'd love to. Coffee led to dinner, and dinner to everything. Michael was sweet, attentive, funny. He listened. He made an effort. We hiked, we went to movies, we tried new restaurants. I let myself fall. Hard. Then came the ice. Meeting Evelyn. Michael warned me. She could be intense. Understatement of the fucking century. The restaurant, upscale, suffocatingly fancy. Evelyn at the head of the table, ruling it. Her eyes, like chipped flint, cold and sharp, stripping me bare with a single glance. So, this is the girl you've been seeing. No warmth. No welcome. Just a dismissive once-over as she barely acknowledged the hand I extended, giving it a brief shake. Robert, Michael's father, offered a weak, placating smile. Thomas, the older brother, a curt nod. They were all orbiting Evelyn, afraid to break free of her gravity. The interrogation began. Where did you say you work, Carly? I'm a perfume sales manager at retail. How quaint. And your family? What do your parents do? I fought to keep my voice steady. My dad's a high school teacher, and my mom's a teacher's assistant. Evelyn's eyebrows shot up. Well, I suppose someone has to do it. Each question a barb. Each answer a disappointment. Michael squeezed my hand under the table, a silent, useless gesture. He couldn't defend me. He wouldn't defend me. After dinner, Evelyn cornered me, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss. Listen carefully, Carly. I run this family. I decide what's best for my son. If you want a future with Michael, you'll need to prove your worth. The audacity. The blatant threat. I was speechless, frozen. I knew then, deep down, that this wasn't just intense, this was war. Michael proposed a few months later. A beautiful ring, a beautiful moment, but Evelyn's shadow already loomed. The wedding. My dream. Hijacked. Evelyn took over everything. Venue, guest list, flowers, the goddamn seating chart. Every decision. Hers. Actually, I had some ideas. I tried, weakly. Ideas are nice, dear, she'd purred, dripping saccharin. But let's leave this to the professionals, shall we? Michael's face was pleading. Just go along with it, Carly. It's easier this way. Easier for whom? So I watched, helpless, as my wedding transformed into Evelyn's twisted spectacle. I told myself it was just one day. That once we were married, things would be different. Stupid. So utterly, tragically stupid. The first few months were a blur of unpacking, settling into our small apartment. A tiny haven, our space. But even here, Evelyn intruded. Unannounced visits. Just checking in, she'd say. Her eyes cold and calculating, dissecting my every choice. Oh dear, is this how you've arranged the living room? Let me show you a better way. I'd grit my teeth, plaster on a smile, and remind myself she was just trying to help. Lies. All lies! It felt like an invasion. One evening, a phone call. My boss. A promotion. Senior sales manager. The opportunity I'd been clawing toward for years. Finally, something good. Something mine. I was stupid enough to share it. The next evening, Evelyn's dining table. The roast. A picture of perfection tasted like sawdust. Carly, Evelyn began, her tone sickeningly sweet. Michael tells me you've been offered a promotion. How nice, I nodded, trying to maintain control. Yes, I'm very excited about it. Evelyn's smile tightened. Well, dear, I think it's time we discuss your future. Your real future, here it comes. We need someone in sales. And with your experience, you'd be perfect. I drew a shaky breath. Evelyn, I appreciate the offer, but I'm happy in my current job. I don't want to leave it. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Her eyes narrowed. Glacial. I see. So you don't consider yourself part of this family then? My temper flared. A dangerous spark. With all due respect, Evelyn, you don't get to decide what's best for my marriage or my career. Evelyn stood, chair scraping against the floor. I think you need to reconsider your priorities, young lady. Michael, talk some sense into your wife. She stormed out. I turned to Michael, begging for support. Instead, I found him torn. Carly, maybe we should think about this. Mom knows what she's doing. The drive home was silent, filled with unspoken anger. I had to face the reality that there was a war going on with the entire family of the man that I had agreed to marry. It wasn't just about me anymore. Lying in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized that my battle wasn't just with Evelyn. It was with the entire goddamn dynamic. I had married into a prison. The tension grew, suffocating. One Sunday, Evelyn's for a barbecue. The air thick with fake smiles and simmering resentment. I was in the kitchen, helping with the salads, when Evelyn's voice, loud and calculated, carried from the patio. It's such a shame, she was saying. I remembered Thomas's ex-wife. She was just as ungrateful as Carly. But I showed her the door. I kicked her out of this family myself. My cheeks burned. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. Mom, please. But Evelyn was on a roll. I'm just saying, a woman should know her place. Isn't that right, Robert? Robert, a pathetic grunt. He never stood up to her. I couldn't take it anymore. I marched onto the patio, salad bowl clutched in my hands. A weapon of sorts. Evelyn, I said, my voice shaking, if you have something to say to me, why don't you say it to my face? The backyard fell silent. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Fine. You want to know what I think? I think you're not good enough for this family. You're stubborn. You're disrespectful. And you're pulling Michael away from his responsibilities. I felt like I'd been slapped. Responsibilities? You mean being your puppet? Carly, Michael pleaded. Please, let's not do this here. I whirled on him. And you? When are you going to stand up to her? When are you going to be a husband instead of a mama's boy? The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I'd crossed a line. Michael's face crumpled. Evelyn looked triumphant. You see, she crowed, this is who you really are. A spiteful, ungrateful girl who doesn't appreciate what she has. Tears stung my eyes. Without another word, I turned and ran, grabbed my purse, my keys, and fled. I never wanted to see her again. The weeks that followed were a frozen hell. Michael and I barely spoke. We were tiptoeing around each other in our own home. One evening, Michael sat at the kitchen table, his expression grim. Mom called today. She wants us to come over for a birthday dinner next week. A knot formed in my stomach. Michael, the first don't think that's a good idea. Please, he pleaded. It would mean a lot to me. And maybe it's a chance to start over. I wanted to refuse. To scream that I was done playing nice with a woman who clearly despised me. But the hope in his eyes made me hesitate. Fine, I said finally. But this is the last chance, Michael. I mean it. Evelyn's birthday. I forced a smile as we entered her house. A house that represented everything I loathed. Carly, dear, Evelyn cooed, air kissing my cheek. So glad you could make it. I was worried you might be too busy with your little job. I bit back a retort, reminding myself to stay calm. The evening crawled by, punctuated by forced pleasantries and thinly veiled insults. As dinner ended, Evelyn announced, "It's time for cake. Carly, be a dear and bring it out. And don't forget the candles." I headed to the kitchen, grateful for the respite. I arranged the candles, counted them. All correct. Back in the dining room, I set the cake down in front of Evelyn. Her eyes narrowed as she counted the candles. "Ah," she said, her voice dangerously sweet. "There's one extra candle here. Can't you even do a simple task correctly? Or perhaps you're trying to insinuate something about my age?" "No, of course not. It's enough," Evelyn snapped. She began plucking out the candles, one by one. "Since you've clearly ruined the design, you might as well see the mess you've made. Come closer, dear. Take a good look." Hesitantly, I leaned in. Suddenly, I felt a hand on the back of my head, pushing me down. Before I could react, my face was shoved into the cake. I gasped, struggling to breathe as frosting filled my nose and mouth. Panic clawed at me. I felt like I was drowning. After what felt like an eternity, Evelyn released me. I straightened up, sputtering and wiping cake from my eyes. The room was silent, save for Evelyn's cruel laughter. "Oh dear," she chuckled. "Looks like someone's made a mess of themselves." I looked around the room in disbelief. The other guests were averting their eyes, some letting out nervous giggles. "And Michael?" Michael was staring at the floor, his face red with embarrassment. Without a word, I turned and fled to the bathroom, locked the door behind me. As I scrubbed the cake from my face, I could hear muffled voices outside. A soft knock came at the door. "Carly?" It was Michael. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" I yanked the door open, fixing him with a glare. "Help? Now you want to help?" He looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "Mom can be a bit eccentric sometimes. We just need to." "Eccentric?" I hissed. "Michael, she assaulted me, and you just stood there." Without another word, I pushed past him, grabbed my purse, and headed for the door. I drove home, blinded by tears, realizing that this was far from an accident. The days after the birthday cake incident were a blur of tears and sleepless nights. Michael tried to apologize, but it was pointless. His words were empty, hollow. I stayed at the office late just to escape the emptiness of home. One afternoon, as I was helping a customer, I heard a familiar voice that made my blood run cold. "Excuse me, I'd like to speak to a manager." I turned to see Evelyn standing there, her eyes burning with hate. My colleague, unaware of who she was, directed her to me. "I'm the senior sales manager. How can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Evelyn's lips curled into a cruel smile. "I have a complaint about the perfume I purchased here last week. The problem is that this perfume smells like cheap chemicals, and when I tried to return it, your staff was incredibly rude to me." I knew she was lying. I was about to say something, but she continued. "This is unacceptable. I demand to speak to your superior immediately." My manager, alerted by the commotion, hurried over. "What seems to be the problem here?" Evelyn launched into her fabricated story, painting me as an incompetent manager who had personally sold her a defective product and then refused to help. I tried to interject, but my manager silenced me. "I'm very sorry for your experience, ma'am. Please come with me to my office. We'll sort this out immediately." As they walked away, Evelyn shot me a triumphant look over her shoulder. I stood there, humiliated and angry, as my colleagues whispered around me. An hour later, my manager called me into his office. His expression was grim. "Carly, I've received multiple complaints about your performance recently, and after today's incident, I'm afraid we're going to have to let you go." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. "What?" "But those complaints, they're not real. It's my mother-in-law. She's trying to." He held up a hand. "Carly, please. I understand you're going through some personal issues, but we can't have them affecting your work like this." "I'm sorry, but my decision is final. I left the office in a daze, my personal belongings in a small cardboard box. I drove home, tears blurring my vision. When I arrived, Michael was waiting, his face etched with concern. "Carly, what happened?" Mom said. "Your mother," I spat, "just cost me my job." I recounted the events of the day, my voice rising with each word. "And you want to know the worst part? She used our phone number to file those fake complaints, Michael. The one you gave her without even asking me." I locked myself in our bedroom, ignoring his pleas from the other side of the door. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I realized I was at a crossroads. I couldn't keep living like this. The weeks that followed were some of the darkest I'd ever experienced. One evening, as I sat at our kitchen table surrounded by job listings and unanswered applications, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "I hear you're looking for work. Maybe it's time to reconsider my offer." Evelyn. I stared at the screen in disbelief. How had she gotten my new number? As if on cue, Michael walked in. I held up my phone. "Did you give your mother my new number?" His hesitation was all the answer I needed. "Look, maybe we should consider her offer. It's for us, for our future." I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "Our future, Michael? There won't be a future if this keeps up. If something doesn't change, and soon, I don't know if I can stay in this marriage." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael looked stunned, as if he couldn't quite process what I'd said. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll talk to her. I promise." Just give me some time. I wanted to believe him, but I'd heard similar promises before. Still, what choice did I have? I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I reached out to an old colleague who had started her own online perfume business. She offered me a position as an online consultant. The pay wasn't great, but it was something that would make me feel productive and independent again. As Christmas approached, the annual family gathering loomed. I dreaded it, knowing it would be another opportunity for Evelyn to belittle me. The night before the gathering, Michael and I had another argument. He wanted me to make more of an effort with his mother, to try to understand her perspective. "Her perspective?" I sputtered. "Michael, her perspective is that I'm not good enough for this family. That I should quit my job and become her puppet. How am I supposed to understand that?" He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "She's just set in her ways. If we could just—" "No," I cut him off. "I'm done trying. If you won't stand up for me, for us, then I'll have to do it myself." As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. Tomorrow, at the Christmas gathering, I would confront Evelyn. I was tired of being a victim. Christmas morning arrived. As we moved into the living room, I could feel Evelyn's eyes on me. I was not looking forward to what she would do next. The afternoon progressed with the usual thinly veiled insults. Evelyn held court, dominating every conversation. Finally, during dinner, she addressed me directly. "Carly, dear," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "I couldn't help but notice you're not drinking any wine. Any special reason?" I felt my cheeks flush as all eyes turned to me. "No, Evelyn. I'm just not in the mood for alcohol." Her eyes narrowed. "HM. Well, I do hope you're not having difficulties in that area. It's just, well, you're not getting any younger, and with your career struggles, I thought perhaps you'd be focusing on more important matters by now." I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "More important matters? You mean like being a submissive wife who gives up her dreams to please her mother-in-law?" Gasps echoed around the table. Evelyn's face contorted with rage. "How dare you speak to me like that in my own home?" "No, Evelyn," I shot back. "How dare you treat me like this? I am your son's wife, not your punching bag. I've had enough of your manipulation and your cruelty." I turned to leave. Evelyn made a sudden movement, knocking over her mug of hot tea. The scalding liquid splashed directly onto me. I screamed in pain as the hot tea soaked through my clothes. I was so mad and in pain. I went to grab a napkin when Evelyn grabbed my arm. I could feel the burns already. Evelyn grabbed my arm, pulling me close. "Listen here, you little brat. she hissed. You will obey me. You will do as I say, or I will destroy you. Through the haze of pain, I looked around the room, desperate for help. But everyone, including Michael, seemed frozen in shock. Finally, Michael stood up, his face pale. I need some air, he mumbled before fleeing the room. In that moment, something inside me broke. Without another word, I wrenched my arm free and ran out of the house. I drove to the nearest hospital, my skin still burning from the tea. As the doctors treated my burns, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. When I returned home, the apartment was empty. I packed a bag with essentials, wrote a brief note, and left. I woke up in the dingy motel room, my skin still tender from the burns. As I was contemplating my next move, my phone rang. I hesitated, expecting it to be Michael. To my surprise, it was my father-in-law, Robert. Carly, his voice sounded strained. Can we meet? It's important. Curiosity got the better of me. Okay, I said. An hour later, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Robert standing there, looking more disheveled than I'd ever seen him. Robert, what's going on? I asked, gesturing for him to sit down. Carly, I'm so sorry, he blurted out as soon as I let him in. There's something you need to know about the company, about Evelyn. He paused, his hand shaking slightly. The company? What about it? Robert's eyes filled with tears. I was a coward. I should have helped my family, but all I have managed to do has hurt them all. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick folder. With trembling hands, I opened the folder and began to read. What I found inside made my blood run cold. I had never seen a family with so many dirty secrets. How could they be so bad and so secretive? As I read and read, I couldn't stop. I knew that these were things that I needed to be made public. I just couldn't let Evelyn get away with this behavior ever again. I looked up at Robert, my hands shaking. This is horrible. How could she do all this? Robert broke down, tears streaming down his face. I'm so sorry, Carly. I should have spoken up years ago. I was afraid of her. As I watched my father-in-law cry, a mix of emotions washed over me, anger at Evelyn's cruelty, and a growing determination to put an end to this injustice. We contacted a lawyer, Amanda Chan, who specialized in corporate fraud cases. Amanda listened to our story and immediately agreed to take on the case. I was so relieved. This nightmare needed to end. My phone exploded with notifications, missed calls, texts, and voicemails, all from Evelyn. I steeled myself and listened to one of the voicemails. I didn't want to listen to Evelyn's voice ever again, but knew I needed to steel myself. You ungrateful little witch, I flinched. How dare you turn my husband against me? I'll ruin you for this. Do you hear me? I'll destroy you. I received an unexpected call. It was Thomas. I was worried he was calling to say awful things to me too. To my surprise, his message was of support. I cried with relief. Thomas's support was a turning point. He provided additional evidence and agreed to testify in court. I had some hope of winning this now. The trial was grueling. Evelyn's lawyers fought dirty, trying to discredit our witnesses. As I was sitting in the courtroom, I saw her smiling. How could she be so cold? I began shaking. I was so angry. After what felt like an eternity, the judge made her ruling. The will was annulled, and ownership of the company was returned to Robert. I could feel the room breathe with relief, and I was sure I could physically feel Evelyn's eyes burning holes into my soul. I could see her getting escorted out of the courthouse, screaming, "This isn't over!" To me, she was a maniacal madwoman. As the gavel fell, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The aftermath of the trial brought sweeping changes. Michael resigned from his position. He cut off all communication with his father. Robert found support in Thomas. Together, they began the task of restructuring the company. My own marriage had crumbled. Michael's loyalty to his mother was too much for me. I had to let him go for my own mental health. I contemplated my next steps. Robert approached me. He said that he would love to have me come work with him at the company. I wanted to do it so bad. I spent the next couple of months working at the company. I was good at my job. Life was good. Months passed. It was on a routine shopping trip when I had an encounter. I froze. There stood Michael and Evelyn. I felt my stomach drop. Evelyn's voice carried clearly. "You weak-willed idiot." She was berating Michael. I never ever wanted to deal with that family ever again. Ever. For a moment, I considered approaching them, but I realized I had nothing to say. Instead, I turned around and left the store. This was closure. I have since moved away and found someone that truly loves me. I finally have the peace that I deserve. I can only look forward and be glad that this chapter is closed forever. Leaving felt like shedding a skin. I packed up my small apartment, traded the cityscape for rolling hills and a sky that seemed to stretch on forever. Robert, bless his heart, understood. He even helped me find a new job far away from the clutches of Evelyn. He knew that I needed my space. I took the bus for the first time. It felt so different. The scenery, the people. I watched the landscape pass me by, feeling like I was finally out of that family's orbit. It was a small town, sleepy in the best way. A community of artists and farmers, people who valued honesty and quiet resilience. My new job wasn't glamorous, managing a small bookstore with a dusty back room full of forgotten treasures. But it was mine. It was a chance to rebuild, to find myself again. The bookstore was called The Open Book, a fitting name, I thought. The owner, a kind, silver-haired woman named Eleanor, saw something in me that I barely recognized myself, a strength buried beneath layers of pain. She gave me space, but also gentle encouragement, a listening ear when I needed it. "Everyone has a story, Carly," she'd say, as she dusted off antique book covers, "and every story has its own way of finding its ending. Yours isn't over yet." The quiet of the bookstore was a balm. I immersed myself in literature, rediscovering old favorites and stumbling upon new worlds. The smell of old paper and binding glue, the hushed voices of customers lost in their own thoughts. It was a haven from the chaos I'd left behind. One day, a customer caught my eye. He was older, maybe mid-50s, with kind eyes and a worn leather jacket. He spent hours browsing the poetry section, a small notebook in hand. He always bought a book or two, always something thoughtful. His name was Daniel. We talked, at first about books, then about life. He was a retired professor, a widower, living a quiet life. He listened with genuine interest, never pushing, never judging. He just saw me. Daniel and I started meeting for coffee after work. Simple, easy conversations. He wasn't trying to fix me or save me. He just enjoyed my company, and I his. He understood loss. He understood grief. He'd seen his own share of darkness. He didn't pry into the details of my past. He just let me talk when I was ready, offering a quiet strength that I found unexpectedly comforting. One afternoon, as we were sitting in a small cafe, he reached across the table and took my hand. It was a simple gesture, but it sent a jolt through me. "Carly," he said, his voice gentle, "I know you've been through a lot. I can see it in your eyes. But you're strong. Don't let anyone take that away from you." I didn't cry. I couldn't. But his words resonated deep within me. A small seed of hope planted in barren ground. Our relationship was slow, careful. There was no grand passion, no whirlwind romance, just a quiet, steady connection built on mutual respect and understanding. He introduced me to his love of painting, taught me to see the world in colors, in light and shadow. We spent hours in his small studio, me awkwardly wielding a brush, him patiently guiding my hand. "Don't be afraid to make mistakes, Carly," he'd say, smiling. "That's how you learn. That's how you find your own voice." He was right. Painting became a release, a way to express the emotions I'd kept bottled up for so long. The anger, the sadness, the fear, They all found their way onto the canvas, transformed into something new. I was starting to heal, to breathe again. Life wasn't perfect. The nightmares still came, Evelyn's face twisted in rage, Michael's betrayal echoing in my ears. The scars, both physical and emotional, were still there. But they were fading, becoming a part of my story, not the whole story. One day, a letter arrived, addressed in a familiar, spidery handwriting. My heart clenched. I knew who it was from before I even opened it. Evelyn! I stared at the envelope, my hands shaking. Part of me wanted to throw it away, to pretend it didn't exist. But another part, a dark, twisted curiosity, compelled me to open it. Inside, a single sheet of paper. The words were carefully chosen, dripping with venom. I know where you are, Carly. The letter read. You can't hide forever. You may think you've escaped, but you'll never truly be free of me. I will make sure of it. Fear washed over me, cold and paralyzing. She'd found me. After all this time, she'd found me. I didn't tell Daniel. I didn't want to burden him with my past. But the letter hung over me like a dark cloud, poisoning my newfound peace. I started looking over my shoulder, jumping at every shadow. The quiet town felt menacing now, the friendly faces suspicious. I was trapped again, imprisoned by fear. One night, I couldn't sleep. The letter was burning a hole in my mind. I tossed and turned, reliving the nightmare over and over. Finally, I got out of bed. I needed to do something. I couldn't live like this, consumed by fear. I drove to Daniel's house. It was late, but I knew he'd understand. I needed his strength, his support. When he opened the door, his face was etched with concern. Carly? What's wrong? I broke down. The tears came, finally, a torrent of pent-up emotion. I showed him the letter, told him everything. He listened patiently, holding me close. When I was finished, he took a deep breath. We're not going to let her do this to you, Carly, he said, his voice firm. We're going to face her. Together. The next morning, we went to the police. I filed a report, showed them the letter. They promised to investigate. I also called Amanda, my lawyer. She was furious. Don't worry, Carly, she said. We're not going to let her get away with this. I knew then that I couldn't run anymore. I had to stand my ground. I had to confront Evelyn one last time. I didn't have to wait long. A week later, I got a phone call from Amanda. Evelyn's been trying to contact Robert, she said. She wants to meet. He's agreed, but he wants you there. He wants your support. My heart pounded. This was it. The final showdown. I met Robert and Amanda at a small restaurant. Robert looked tired, defeated. He was still haunted by the guilt of his past. I don't know what she wants, Carly, he said, his voice barely a whisper. But I have to hear her out. I owe it to myself and to you. We waited. The minutes stretched on, each one filled with dread. Finally, she arrived. Evelyn! She looked older, her face lined and bitter, but her eyes still held that cold, calculating glint. Robert, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. It's been a while. Robert nodded, his face expressionless. What do you want, Evelyn? She looked at me, a flicker of hatred in her eyes. I want her out of your life, Robert. She's a poison. She's ruined everything. I stood up, my voice trembling. I'm not afraid of you anymore, Evelyn. You can't control me. You can't hurt me. Evelyn laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Oh, really, Carly? You think you've won? You think you've escaped? You're wrong. I will always be a part of your life. I will always be there, reminding you of what you've lost. No, I said, my voice gaining strength. You're wrong. You're not a part of my life. You're just a memory. A bad memory. And I'm finally ready to let you go. I turned to Robert. I'm leaving, Robert, I said. I can't be here for this, but I know you'll do the right thing. I walked out of the restaurant, leaving Evelyn speechless. I didn't look back. I never saw Evelyn again. Amanda informed me that she'd back down, realizing she had nothing to gain by continuing her harassment. The threat of legal action, The weight of her past sins finally silenced her. Robert eventually found peace. He continued to run the company ethically, with Thomas by his side. He made amends to the workers Evelyn had exploited, providing them with fair wages and safe working conditions. Michael remained estranged, trapped in his own cycle of anger and denial. I felt a pang of sadness for him, but I knew I couldn't save him. He had to save himself. Daniel was my rock. He helped me to heal, to find joy again. We built a life together, a life filled with love, laughter, and quiet contentment. One day, I decided to write my story, to put it all down on paper, to exorcise the demons that still lingered. It was a painful process, but also cathartic. I wrote about the perfume counter, about the glimmer of hope I'd felt when I met Michael. I wrote about Evelyn, about her cruelty and her control. I wrote about the wedding, about the barbecue, about the birthday cake. I wrote about the fear, the betrayal, the loss. And I wrote about the healing, about the kindness I'd found in unexpected places, about the strength I'd discovered within myself. When I was finished, I sent the manuscript to Eleanor. She read it in one sitting, her eyes filled with tears. "Carly," she said, her voice trembling, This is incredible. You have a gift. You need to share this with the world." I hesitated. The thought of exposing my story, of reliving the pain, was terrifying, but I also knew that it was important, that my story could help others, could give them hope. With Eleanor's encouragement, I decided to publish my book. The book was a success. It resonated with readers who had experienced their own forms of abuse and control. I received letters from people all over the world, thanking me for sharing my story, for giving them the courage to speak out. I became an advocate for victims of abuse. I spoke at conferences, shared my story on podcasts, and worked with organizations that provided support and resources to those in need. I found my voice, and I used it. Years passed. The scars faded, becoming a reminder of how far I'd come. I was no longer defined by my past. I was defined by my strength, by my resilience, by my ability to overcome. One evening, as I sat in my small cottage surrounded by books and paintings, Daniel by my side, I realized that I was finally free. I had finally escaped the darkness, and I had created a life that was filled with light. The end.